Hello learner, I am Professor Preeti Singh from Department of Political Science, Vasanta College for Women, Rajghat, Varanasi. I welcome you to the second week of the course Environmental Politics, Theories, Concepts and Debates. In this week, we will try to understand environmentalism and political ideologies. We'll try to understand that how various political ideologies like liberalism, socialism, Marxism responded to environmental concern. And what was the outcome of that response? You see, during 1960s and 70s, when environmental concern came at the center stage, so various political ideology felt the need to respond to that. Why did they feel this need? Because they all were talking about the model of good society. And they were also claiming what? That their model of good society is the best model. So obviously, it was necessary for them to respond to the urgent need of the society so they can say actually their model of the good society is the best model, and therefore they started responding to environmental concerns. And as a result of this response, certain new political ideologies emerged. To name a few: eco-capitalism, eco-anarchism, eco-socialism, and so on. One thing which we need to keep in our mind, that relation of these new political ideologies with their parent ideology was quite complex. Why? Because on the one hand, they drew their inspiration from their parent ideology, but at the same time, while addressing environmental concerns, they also took a critical position, and this made this relation very complex as well as very interesting. So in this week, we will try to cover eco-socialism, then right-wing ecologism, eco-anarchism, ecofeminism, and deep ecology and shallow ecology. In this lecture, which is the first lecture of week 2, we will talk about eco-socialism. So in today's lecture, we will talk about basically definition of eco-socialism. Then we will also talk about Marxist strand and socialist strand, debate between green agenda and red agenda, features of eco-socialism, its major arguments, actions suggested by eco-socialism, and its critique. So, when we talk about eco-socialism, it is an ideology which developed during 1970s, and it is really very critical of capitalism and its effect on the environment and human welfare. So it is very important. You see, when socialism talks about capitalism, it basically engages with its impact on human welfare. But eco-socialism also talks about its impact on environment. Rudolf Bahro is a very important name, who is from Germany. He is an eco-socialist. He sees capitalism as the root cause of environmental crisis. Why? Because what is his argument? That the uncontrolled industrialism, actually that results from capitalism's search for an ending profit. Because capitalism looks for profit, and therefore it results in uncontrolled industrialism. So eco-socialism basically believes that environmental degradation is caused by exploitative and unequal socio-economic relationship. So this is very important to understand, that eco-socialism says what? That ecological crisis and the social inequality, they are closely related to each other. They are not separate from each other. Why? Because if there would be relations of inequality in society, then it would lead to environmental degradation. So these two questions of sustainability and social justice, according to eco-socialism, are related to each other. So therefore, it challenges this very cycle and talks about the paradigm shift. Towards what? Towards an egalitarian and socio-economic system. Now, if we talk about definition of eco-socialism, one very important definition has been given by Michael Lowy, and he says what? That eco-socialism basically is a political current based on an essential insight. What is that insight? That preserving the ecological equilibrium of the planet is incompatible with the expensive and destructive logic of the capitalist system. So, if we want ecological equilibrium on this planet, then we need to go beyond capitalist system. Why? Because this pursuit of growth, which is the core feature of capitalism, that according to Lowy will lead us very soon towards such kind of catastrophe which we have not witnessed in history. So now I'll talk about historical background of eco-socialism. Eco-socialism draws its inspiration from two strands. One is the Marxist and second is socialist. So you see, eco-socialism draws upon Marxist analysis and it distances itself from the ecology based on quasi-religious ideas. In the last week, we had seen that ecologism is a very comprehensive ideology which is full of diversity. So there are also branches of ecologism which says that there is a religious connection between nature and humans, and when it comes to find out solution to environmental crisis, they adopt a spiritual approach. So eco-socialism, being a materialist philosophy and ideology, it doesn't take that spiritual or religious direction. So it takes inspiration from where? From Marxist analysis. And it does what? Basically, we have seen in the last week that Marx has, in some of his writing, talked about the ecological cost of capitalism. So, eco-socialism takes inspiration from those writings of Marx. Now, second is socialist strength, where it draws inspiration from pastoral socialism of William Morris. William Morris envisions a society that will live harmoniously with nature, which will be free from industrial capitalism's exploitation. In his very famous work, News from Nowhere, he depicted a decentralized, egalitarian society which would be based on communal living and sustainable craftsmanship. So you see, this ideal of society which we can see in William Morris, it emphasizes what? The idea of simplicity, localism, and artisanal production. So we can find that Morris talks about a society which will be in total contrast with the present system of mass industrialization. So this would not be wrong to say that this laid the foundation for a type of environmentalism that critiques large-scale capitalist production and consumerism. So William Morris, in his writings, condemned the dehumanizing impact of industrial capitalism on worker. And in fact, it was he who raised an early alarm about the threat this industrial capitalism poses to the natural world. Now we will talk about some of the major arguments of eco-socialism. Mainly, it gives two major arguments. First, it says that the present mode of production and consumption of advanced capitalist countries is not possible to be extended to the whole planet. That means if we want to extend this mode of development to the other part of world, this argues that we can do it, but only on one cost, that is ecological crisis. So it is very important that they are arguing that the present capitalist mode of consumption and production cannot be extended to the whole planet without damaging the ecology. Second argument which it gives, it says that this continuation with this form of capitalism, if we try to continue with this mode of capitalism or this form of capitalism, so it will threaten the very survival of humanity in the long run. So it is not dangerous for particular community or for particular class, but in the long run, it is going to create a kind of existential crisis for whole humanities. So eco-socialism here says what? That if we are making any kind of effort to protect the natural environment, so actually this effort is what? It is not just important for nature, rather it is a fundamental human necessity. Here we can see that it talks about a kind of, prudential anthropocentrism. That okay, fine, we have to work very hard to protect environment, not only because we are concerned about environment, but because we are concerned about our own survival. And our own survival and the well-being of the environment, both are connected to each other. Here we will talk about a debate within Marxist ideology. Basically, Marxist ideology talks about red perspective and ecology talks about green perspective. Firstly, we'll try to understand what is red perspective, then what is green perspective, and then we will try to understand what is the eco-socialist position on red perspective and green perspective. So, red perspective basically is a Marxist socialist view. So obviously it is rooted in what? In Marxist critique of capitalism. So its focus will be on the issue of class struggle, exploitation, and economic inequality. It challenges capitalist mode of production. On which ground? On the ground that it prioritizes profit over people. And obviously it leads to social injustice. So the red perspective envisions an alternative society which would be based on collective ownership, social equity, and the abolition of capitalist exploitation. Now, green perspective, which is an ecological view. So, green perspective critiques productivism. What is productivism? That is endless drive for economic growth and industrial expansion, which leads to environmental degradation. What is very interesting to observe here that green perspective is also critical to capitalist system, but on the ground of sustainability. It says that capitalist system cannot be sustainable because of its reliance on overproduction and overconsumption. And this perspective advocates for harmony with nature, sustainable resource use, and environmental justice. So, you see, the traditional Marxist perspective, it basically talks about red perspective and it says that once capitalism is abolished, all other problems will be resolved automatically. But eco-socialists say what? That along with red perspective, we need to take into consideration green perspective. And sometime it may also be required that green perspective should be given priority over red perspectives. So this is a kind of tension within Marxism, that traditional Marxists say, okay, fine, we will confine to only red politics, red perspective, while eco-socialists say, no, if we really want a better society, we need to engage in both red perspective as well as green perspective. Now, therefore, we can say that eco-socialism is a kind of radical synthesis. Why are we saying it is a radical synthesis? It is not merely a kind of mixture of little socialism and little environmentalism. It is a radical position. Why? Because it distinguishes itself from the productivist variety of socialism. That was the dominant variety during the 20th century. At the same time, it distances itself from the ecological currents that try to accommodate themselves in one way or another to the capitalist system. It demands that both these positions need to be changed. The productivist variety of socialism as well as that capitalist variety of environmentalism, both need to be transformed. So therefore, it advocates for a new way of life that harmonizes social equality and environmental sustainability. That is the point which I raised in the beginning of the lecture. So, this radical proposition aims not only, you see, transformation and the relation of production only, or certain changes in productive apparatus, or some changes in dominant consumption pattern. It says what we need to create a new way of life, breaking with the foundation of the modern industrial capitalism. That's why we say it is a radical synthesis. Now, Michael Lowy, he conceptualizes an eco-socialist society where he talks about the features of eco-socialist society. So it says what? That eco-socialist society is an ecologically rational society. It is very important. It is a rational society, but what kind of rational society? Ecologically rational society. Founded on democratic control, social equality, and the predominance of use value. So this conception assumes collective ownership of the means of production, democratic planning that makes it possible for society to define the goals of investment and production and a new technological structure of the productive forces. So this is the conceptualization of eco-socialist society according to Michael Lowy. Now, a very important question which has been raised by eco-socialists, that why environmentalists need to be a socialist? Why socialism is the only solution for environmental question? They give mainly three arguments. First, they say there is no end to capitalism. So if we are trying to find out some kind of solution within capitalism, that is not possible, because capitalism is driven by profit and endless growth at the cost of environment. So its very nature is not tuned with environmental need. Second, it also says that those group of scholars or policymakers which tries to explore the green capitalism and try to see how it can solve the environmental concerns. It says no, green capitalism has its own limit. Why? Because it basically aims to reduce environmental impact, but without challenging the existing economic institution. So its effort would always be superficial, and it will always prioritize market logic over collective ecological needs. So eco-socialists argue what? That capitalism is the part of ecological problem, while eco-socialism is a part of solution. So environmentalists need to be socialist. Now, second very important question, why socialism needs to embrace environmentalism? They say that socialism, when it talks about a kind of society which will be free from any kind of injustice or free from any kind of inequality, so it must respond to the major challenges of the time or major challenges of the age. And climate change being one of the major challenges of the present time, which poses unprecedented threats. So, therefore, immediate action is required to handle it. So, therefore, socialism need to be uh, eco-friendly. Second, it critiques past socialism, that is basically about 20th century socialism. It says what? That the Soviet communism, despite being very, very critical to capitalist practices, but when it comes to industrial practice, it almost followed the same pattern, causing major environmental degradation. So, therefore, the past socialism or the 20th century socialism need to develop its own way, which will be in tune with the needs of the environment. So, eco socialism integrates ecology into socialism and addresses both social inequality and environmental degradation. This is one of the very important feature of eco-socialism, that it tries to find out a way which can resolve these two problems together. Why? Because these two are related to each other. Now, you see, eco-socialism is an ideology. Fine. So, because it is an ideology, so it will firstly present a critique of the existing system. It will suggest an alternative framework, and at the same time, it has to suggest certain actions. Why? Because when we talk about ideology, it is basically action-oriented ideas. So, suggesting action is very, very important for eco-socialism. Now, we'll see what kind of actions are suggested by eco-socialism to deal with the ecological concern. First, it talks about democratic ecological planning. It says that economic decisions are to be made by the people rather than markets or political elite. Second, there should be social ownership of resources. Third, use value should be the only criteria for the production of goods and services. Now, what does it mean? That what to produce, how much to produce, all these decisions will be taken on the ground of need of the society, not on the basis of profit motive, which is the case in capitalism. Third, it says there should be participation of working people in the democratic discussions and management of economy and society. Fourth point is very, very important. It says that we need to go beyond this binary of growth versus degrowth. What does it mean? That in the present time, the capitalist mode of production has been projected as growth, and the alternative mode have over been projected as degrowth. So eco-socialism says that we need to go beyond that. We need a qualitative transformation of development. Why? Because when we put the whole thing into growth and degrowth, so the question is that how many takers would be there to degrowth agenda. So that's why they say that we need to go beyond this growth and degrowth. And we need a kind of qualitative transformation in the development discourse or in the development framework. Now we will talk about how critiques have responded to eco-socialism. So one very important critique is done by Andreas Malm and Quincy Saul. They see a risk of authoritarianism in eco-socialism. What they argue, that the kind of changes eco-socialism wants to bring, it may lead towards authoritarian decision, the kind of massive changes it is talking about. They say there is a doubt whether this kind of change would be possible through democratic decision making. Though we had seen just now that it emphasizes a lot on democratic decision making. But the critics say that this kind of major changes or massive changes, it it is doubtful whether we can bring this kind of change through democratic method or not, and is there any possibility that this kind of change will take us towards authoritarianism. Another critique is done by Matt Huber and Joel Cowell. They critique it on the ground of lack of strategic thinking. They say what? That eco-socialism gives a hope of an idealized future, a very hopeful picture, but fails in providing a roadmap for it. So how can we reach there? This point is not well discussed by eco-socialists according to Matt Huber and Joel Cowell. Another very important critique is done by Hubert Butch Hansen. Hansen challenges it on the ground of weak public support and argues that the growth agenda of eco-socialism lacks necessary public support to be implemented democratically. This point is further continued by Sam Gindin, who suggests that eco-socialists need to honestly address the issue of costs and trade-off of their proposal. A very, very important critique is done by Ariel Selle, who is a eco-feminist. In her article, Why Eco-Socialism is Not Enough, Eco-Feminist Reflections on Another Value Form. The point Selle raises is that eco-socialism, particularly in its Marxist form, does not fully address the intersection of patriarchy, colonialism, and capitalism. Basically, Selle does what? She tries to reflect on eco-socialism from the perspective of Global South and also from the perspective of women in Global South. What she argues that basically eco-socialism presents a very, simple picture that all environmental degradation is due to capitalism. Capitalism is responsible for it, there is no doubt. But Selle says what? This relation is much more complex. Why it is much more complex? Because she says that when we look at the experiences of the Global South and that also the experiences of the people at the fringes in the Global South, then it appears that it is not only capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy. These three together creates a very, very complex structure of exploitation of women as well as environment. So Selle says what? That by presenting such a simplistic picture of environmental degradation and its relation with capitalism, somehow eco-socialism does what? She says that eco-socialism suffers from a kind of Eurocentric bias. So in this discussion, till now we have tried to understand what is eco-socialism, what are its various features, what are the major arguments of eco-socialism, and also the debate between green agenda and red agenda, or green perspective and red perspective. Now I'll be talking about the references which I have used in this lecture. You see, these are some of the references which I have used in this lecture, and you can consult these references as further reading. If you want a deeper understanding of this topic, you need to go through these readings. And like Michael Lowy's work is very, very interesting. Murray Bookchin's work on what is social ecology, that is also very interesting. There are some more references which you should go through in order to have a deeper understanding of the topic. Now coming to the some of the activity questions. You see, I have designed it in a way so that it can help you to firstly assess your learning, how much you have learned after going through the lecture, and second also uh, to make you think critically. So the first question is compare and contrast between red perspective and green perspective, which we have discussed in detail. Now, the second is to discuss the eco-socialist critique of orthodox Marxism and eco-capitalism. That also we discussed when we were talking about that eco-socialism is a radical synthesis. Now, once you go through the lecture and also the suggested reading, and you have assimilated it, after that you have to think over this. This is to make you think critically. How far the eco-socialist solution to environmental crisis is feasible and desirable? Now, while answering this question, you have to adopt two frameworks. One is feasibility framework, another is desirability framework. So one, you will see whether it is possible or not, whether it is feasible or not. And second, whether it is desirable or not. So these are the activity questions that will help you to assess your learning as well as to make you think critically. So thank you so much, learners. In this lecture, we have tried to understand eco-socialism, its various aspects in detail, and I'm very sure that it will help you to understand eco-socialism. Go through the lecture, and if you have any doubt, any query, then you can just post your queries, your doubts in the discussion forum, and we'll try to respond to those doubts and queries. So this was for the this lecture. Now we'll be meeting in the next lecture where we will discuss about right-wing ecologism. Thank you so much for joining the lecture. Thank you.